You know that part of yourself you try not to look at? The one that feels messy, complicated, embarrassing, or just really hard to face? That's your shadow. My new book, Dark Shadow, Golden Shadow, published by Wiser, is all about learning to see that part of yourself and realizing it's not something to eliminate or fear, but something to understand, because it often impacts all aspects of our life and our relationships without us even realizing it. My book blends psychology, tarot, and therapeutic self-reflection to help you move from shame to awareness and integration. Dark Shadow, Golden Shadow comes out December 8th, but it's available for pre-order now wherever books are sold. You are listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. I'm your host, Shannon. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I also happen to have a love for tarot. Each episode, I invite you to reflect with me as I work to demystify the tarot and the human experience, all while exploring tarot's connection to mental and emotional health. While this podcast may feel therapeutic, it is not meant to take the place of psychotherapy. So grab your cards and join me as I work to create a pathway to better understand ourselves and those around us. So this week's episode was actually inspired by a song that I have not been able to get out of my head, and it's Timekeeper by Grace Potter and the Nocturnals. I'll link the YouTube clip in the show notes so you can listen to it. But yeah, it's just been like playing in my head, and it's interesting because I haven't listened to that song in a long time. And yeah, I usually when that happens to me, and because it will happen, relatively frequently, it's usually because like I heard a word that reminded me of a song, and I'll either just like break out into said song or the song will just kind of like play over and over in my head. So something happened. I think maybe it was probably because I was kind of lightly reflecting on the concept of time and what time means to each of us, and then thinking about how time shows up in tarot. And I realized, that hasn't been something that I've talked about in much depth. So I figured, okay, well, this song will not get out of my head, and it's an interesting concept. So let's talk about it. Time is one of those concepts that I think we all treat as if it's this like universal objective experience, like as if we all kind of perceive it the same way simply because clocks exist. But the truth is, like, time is so subjective. Like the way we experience time is very subjective. Sure, like we all know that it's, X time depending on where we live in the world, and don't even get me started on time zones. I'm currently working within 4 time zones, and it's it's chaos all the time in my calendar. But even beyond that, just like anyone who is neurodivergent, who has experienced trauma, who's currently grieving, who's ever had the experience of creating something or falling in love, or honestly, like just being alive, knows that time feels both expansive and limiting. It's like contracting and bending and going way too fast and moving way too slowly all at the same time, or it switches from day to day or hour to hour. It's not a straight line. And it's important to remember that whatever your nervous system has kind of been shaped by, whether that's, ADHD or anxiety or attachment trauma, all of that can alter how you exist within your own 24 hours. And so I'm listening to this song, Timekeeper by Grace Potter and the Nocturnals, and it's interesting because even like the timing of the song, some parts of it actually like make me uncomfortable. And there's like, of course, like research out there that show like a certain timing of music, like absolutely has that effect. So that's one of the reasons music affects many of us so deeply. But then I started paying attention to the lyrics, and there's some really interesting lines that she says throughout the song. And I kind of started categorizing them into kind of how we as humans experience time and what that means for us on more of a psychological and therapeutic level. And I was like, you know what? Let's kind of go in that direction. Let's have fun with music again. I do that every once in a while on this podcast because if you know me, you know, music is a huge part of my life. I used to be a music journalist when I was younger, and I'm constantly surrounded by people like in the music world. And yeah, just another, and also I'm a drummer. I don't know if anybody knows that about me, actually. Oh my gosh, I don't know if I have ever really shared that with anybody. I think there are a couple of people who listen who who know, but yeah, in fact, I was just playing right before we hopped on here. But yeah, so music's a big part of my life. And so I was like, let's explore how tarot and therapy fits into this concept of time and our relationship to it. So I just want to explore some lyrics and give kind of a generalization, an overview. So there's a part of the song where she says, I'm too young to be feeling this way. Yeah, I'm wasted as I lie awake. There goes another day. And then timekeeper, please won't you slow it down tonight? Timekeeper, the days are rolling by. Timekeeper, tell me I'm going to be all right. And then timekeeper, I thought I'd have it right by now. And that kind of made me think of this universal experience of I should have had it all figured out by now. I should be further. And it's a super familiar relationship that folks have with time where they kind of combine their worth into this concept of time. And it's for everything that I just said, like I should have had my life figured out by now. I should be more successful. I should be healed. Other people are ahead of me. What's wrong with me? And it's this very kind of like classic internalization of expectation that you're supposed to be on some sort of very specific linear timeline. And anytime there's a deviation from that somehow means you've failed or you're not doing something right. And I think that experience happens to all of us and it shows up everywhere, whether that's like in therapy, when you're hanging out with your friends at an event, scrolling social media is a huge one. And, add on to that, our culture really kind of like worships this idea of time and like being on a schedule. I mean, think about corporate America. Like our whole identities exist on what time are we going to wake up and what time are we going to have breakfast and how much time do we have before we start our day? And then how much time do we have to spend at work? And then how much time do I have after work to like do all these other things? And when you start to look at that, you start to realize that even just the concept of scheduling and time was kind of built on capitalism. And then there's this like external validation system that exists within that where it affects your nervous system and none of your needs are actually being met in the process because you're just on this like hamster wheel of time. And so when I was thinking about tarot, I was like, oh, this feels so much like Eight of Pentacles, which is like my card. I love this card so much. But I do feel like it kind of represents that kind of relentless grind that we have to exist in. And this belief that mastery or worth comes from that constant productivity experience. But then we could also pair that with the judgment card, which I think allows us to step back and say, wait, hold on, who are we doing this for? And whose timeline are we actually on? And I think judgment kind of invites us to have this, because one of the words that we associate with judgment is awakening, to have some sort of like awakening about, wait, how can I exist in this world where time is obviously very important? I can't like be delusional and live in a different reality. I mean, I guess technically you could, but that's probably not healthy. But I think we could use the judgment card paired with the Eight of Pentacles to say, okay, hold on. How am I living my life in alignment with my values and the way that I need to experience time and what feels right for me versus how am I actually existing and maybe living for what other people expect of me? And, so we could look at judgment. Typically, when you see this card, there's, this big angel in the sky and all these people kind of like rising up from coffins in the water. And Obviously there's a lot of heavy religious undertones. I don't subscribe to that. So I try to put my own therapeutic spin on the cards. So we could think of that as, okay, who is this kind of like big, overbearing, kind of leader identity that is, I'm kind of like at mercy to? And how can you balance knowing, okay, there are certain aspects of time that I do have to subscribe to, but how can I try to reset my nervous system in a way so that I'm not kind of like existing in that sense of urgency or timeline existence I was talking about a moment ago outside of work, for example? Another part of the song where she said, I'm too old, or no, not too old, I'm too young to be feeling this way. Maybe that was a Freudian slip there. I'll leave that in. I won't edit it. But I like that line a lot because I do feel like it touches on another relationship that is kind of universal with time. And that is this realization and grief that our time is finite and our life is actually happening. And we don't get to be here forever. We are here for a very short time in the grand scheme of the universe. And, there's a really strange paradox that exists within this concept because, and I think as you get older, you start to experience this more where maybe you're in your 40s and you're like, oh, I still feel 25, like maybe mentally, but your body is like obviously aging and it's a little bit more difficult to climb out of bed in the morning and life keeps moving. And, suddenly you're aware that, the clock isn't just kind of like ticking the days away. Like it's going to sound kind of morbid, but it's like kind of feels like it's counting down. Like that mortality clock. And, again, not trying to be morbid, it's more of like an existential reality, and this awareness that, we are aging. And yeah, someday you're going to become someone's ancestor. And childhood is not a place that you can return to, no matter how vividly you remember it. And I think I went through a phase earlier this year where I was kind of like obsessed with the concept of nostalgia. I was like so deep in nostalgia and I was like focusing on, I was reading a lot about how like detrimental it can be as well, especially like in the landscape of our world politically right now. But I was more interested in nostalgia from an internal grief standpoint and, mostly how there are things that we maybe didn't appreciate enough and we can't go back to them no matter how much we wish we could. And I feel like that's a representation of the death card. And, because it's a very kind of clear mirror of endings and transformations, and not even in the literal sense, but like that aspect of our life, for example, that maybe we long for or have nostalgia for, we can't go to. And I feel like the death card reminds us that even though there are endings, it also paves the way for beginnings. And so when we stay stuck in that nostalgic space, that's when it becomes unhealthy because then, when we're thinking about this through the lens of time, in a way, we stop our own timeline. Like kind of the world keeps spinning, but we're not existing with the spinning. We are kind of like firmly planting our feet in the ground and desperate to have something that we can't have and won't ever have. And so like allowing ourselves to kind of step into that death card and do work around that kind of helps ease that discomfort and frame things as, not necessarily bypassing, but still acknowledging, yes, this has ended. And now what are you going to do now that, this other door has opened, for example? And, that now that I'm saying this, I was originally thinking about this in terms of the death card, but this is also like very Six of Cups. I mean, that is what we refer to as like the nostalgic card, this either kind of like longing for our former self or a former time period. And the grief that exists there is because we can't be that version of ourselves. We can't go back to that time. And it's really bittersweet in that space because there's a coexisting of both again, the nostalgia, and there's can be some sweetness to that. And also like sorrow, like for not being able to go back. And I think that relationship to time continues to get stronger as we age and get further away from those different versions of ourselves and different aspects of the way that we lived. And, it's interesting because I think we become more reflective of our choices, and that, every time we say yes to one thing, that means we're also saying no to something else. And that every kind of path we end up on means that we've abandoned another path. And, it's interesting. I was watching something recently about, I forget what they called it. It was also like something on time, and how there, could be a million different versions of ourselves, but the version that we are in right now is because of a million different decisions that we've made, and every kind of season of life that we end up in creates a new version of us. And eventually that version of us becomes a memory. And I think that's why my brain just now went to like Six of Cups. Like, oh yeah, this is so Six of Cups and death combined for sure. And then that leads me into this kind of like a love-hate relationship that exists with time, where earlier I was talking about how we have to, rely on time. And yet I think so many people also resent the existence of time, or like how it exists in such a structured way today. Like, I mean, think about how you talk about time. I can't, there's so many experiences and people I've had who say things like, and I'm so guilty of this as well. Like, there's never enough time, or like, why is the day dragging? Or how is it already December? That is something I have caught myself saying so much this year, especially like in the symposium, the tarot diagnosis membership community, because we have like 4 events each month where we all kind of get together and hang out, and we'll do a workshop in the reading room and the book club, and then, a community gathering. And then at the end of each meetup, I usually talk about, what the next few meetups we have going on. And lately I've just caught myself saying, how is it already October? How is it already November? How is it already December? And I was like kind of annoyed with myself when I was saying that, because I understand from a psychological standpoint, when time is going by too fast, that means we're not really having many new experiences. And I am someone who loves new experiences, despite, also being someone who really loves structure and routine and predictability. And I think that's why a big part of why I'm a therapist. I really don't like doing the same thing every day, even though sometimes I wish that I was just like sitting in front of a computer doing a repetitive task. That's when my burnout is spiking. But I would be so bored and so miserable. Like, being a therapist means I get to experience something new every single day. I never know. I know, of course, like what I'm working on with my clients, but from day to day, who knows what's happening in their life that they then bring into the therapy room. So, it's kind of exciting in that way. So I realized I kept saying this, oh my God, how is it October? How is it November? How is it December? And then that told me, oh, I need to start having some new experiences. So that is a goal that I've set myself for 2026, is at least once a month, I want to put myself in a new space, a new area, try something new, because studies show that actually helps us feel like time is slowing down a little bit. And as we age, it is so easy for us to say, oh my God, time went by so fast. It was like, I blinked and, 10 years went by. And I know that I can't avoid that. It's still going to feel that way. But there are things that I can do and that you can do to help us feel like we're getting the most out of the time that we have. However, all of that to say, there's still a component of that is outside of our control. And that's because of how our nervous systems organize these experiences that we're having. So, for example, like anxiety speeds time up and slows it down. So depending on like the type of anxiety we're having, like we could have an increased in sense of urgency and like, oh my God, we have to do everything now. And then suddenly we're like moving a mile a minute. Or if we're having a panic attack, time slows down so intensely that 60 seconds could feel like an hour. And then depression slows things down as well. And then neurodiversity, ADHD, for example, that is a whole other, that's a whole tangent I could go on, like time blindness, procrastination. It's a whole other thing. And then trauma actually fractures time. And so we have all these like little fragments of memories, and even the way we experience time in the present moment can be fragmented if we're having issues with dissociation, for example. So a lot of mental health and psychology, reasoning behind why we're experiencing time in the way that we are as well. And then, outside of mental health stuff, like creativity is a big one. Creativity slows time down, can speed it up too. There's there's so much like kind of like duality here, because think about when you're stepping into a creative project and you're like really in the zone. Time feels slow because you usually feel at ease, but then you look up and it's like, oh my God, an hour has passed. No way. So like we're having this kind of like internal calm, which then kind of makes us feel like everything's slowed down because our nervous system is regulated. And then we look at the clock, and then the same amount of time would have passed either way. But like our feeling was like, oh, that was like, really kind of slow and deliberate. But then at the same time, it's like, oh, wow, like an hour went by quick. So yeah, a lot of like interesting kind of experiences with time internally. And when I think about time through this lens, I think about the hanged man, because I always refer to the hanged man as a purposeful pause, where we are kind of like suspending time. And so again, like trying new things, putting yourself in new environments, getting creative. These are all ways to kind of like surrender and allow ourselves to relax into time so that we're not overcome with this sense of urgency or anxiety or, trying to fix, time by like forcing discipline or schedules or, rigid routines, habit trackers, all these things that, depending on what you're dealing with can be very helpful. I don't want to make it seem like it's not, but it's so important to calm our nervous system when it comes to time. And I feel like the hanged man does a really good job at kind of inviting us into that without it feeling overwhelming or scary. Another aspect of time that I was thinking about was in the song when she says, "There goes another day." And I hear this from clients so much, and friends, and I mean, even myself sometimes. And I feel like it really captures that experience of watching time pass and feeling like we haven't participated in it fully. And I mean, there's a million reasons why that could be, either because, life is too overwhelming right now, because of our jobs, but mostly, honestly, digital overstimulation. We blame ourselves for not using our time wisely, but I mean, time theft is systemic. We are being programmed to need people to steal our time. That is how, things like TikTok and like, social media and doom scrolling work. Social media fragments our focus, and then add that to like this hyper productivity culture that we live in, which leaves us way too exhausted to engage meaningfully in the experiences that we actually need and want to have. And then there are things, I've mentioned ADHD a couple of times, revenge, sleep procrastination's a big thing, especially when you have ADHD. And, that happens when you're desperate to kind of like reclaim your autonomy and your time, because your time is being fragmented throughout the day, usually because of work, other obligations. And also we don't realize, but honestly, like the doom scrolling. And this really made me think of like the shadow of the Four of Swords, because I feel like that really kind of captures this shutdown, but not in an intentional way. We're kind of like, especially when it comes to time theft, like stepping into this like sarcophagus room and basically saying, here I am, take all my time. And so like having to figure out and we've been told that that's like how we relax, right? Like doom scrolling is our form of relaxation, but like none of us actually feel relaxed after doing that. And so I think working with the Four of Swords, especially both its kind of like neutral state and then shadowed state could be really beneficial, because it's like, in what ways am I not actually being honest with myself about how I'm using my time and what would actually feel good? So something fun that kind of happened when I was thinking about this episode, I was like, you know what, let me pull some cards. And I grabbed the Mystic Storyteller deck from a very good friend of mine, Mandy Hughes from Haint Blue Creative. And it's such a fun, inclusive deck, by the way. Highly recommend getting it if you don't already have it. So I was just shuffling and ended up pulling the Wheel of Fortune, which felt timely. Ha ha ha. One, because we're stepping into a Wheel of Fortune year. Also, plug my Year Ahead 2026 Tarot Journal. A Year with the Wheel of Fortune is out now. So if you want to work with the Wheel of Fortune for the year of 2026, and you want a nice little essay each month and daily prompts to pull to or just reflect to and little exercises to do each month, you can grab that on my website, thetarotdiagnosis.com, in digital format. And then the physical form, if you want the actual book, you can grab on Amazon, but the links are all on my website. But yeah, so I pulled the Wheel of Fortune and I was like, wait, this looks like a clock. How have I not really sat with that imagery before? And, there's this like kind of like turning and shifting and, marking of the seasons and different cycles. And I was like, oh, this is like such the time card. And even more than it just kind of representing a clock, I think it looks like the selves we once were, the people we are becoming, also the people we could have been. There's just so many different kind of like alternate timelines that exist within this card. And yeah, it really feels like kind of like the architecture of time, all these like turning points, missed opportunities, accidents, synchronicities, redirections. And when it shows up in a reading, it can kind of feel like, okay, is time moving in a way that we are happy and satisfied with? In what ways can we control this? In what ways can we not control it? What are we resisting? And just a reminder that the wheel continues to turn whether you like it or not. And this is usually when like patterns reveal themselves too, because, cycles, keep coming back if we don't put an end to them. So yeah, I've just been like, it was interesting to see that card and reflect on it, because I feel like I have been thinking about time a little bit more than usual lately, which is probably why the song Timekeeper was stuck in my head. And thinking about it in terms of tarot, even beyond just like the cards I talked about today, or, pulling the Wheel of Fortune, there's some great resources, online that talk about the suit specifically as timelines or times. And there's even a deck I had years ago. I think I donated it, but it was, I wish I remember what it was called, but it really focused on the suits as seasons, which I thought was really fascinating. But I know that people, when we think of the suits, tend to look at wands as days, swords as weeks, cups as months, and pentacles as years. And I think there's variations of this, of course. But I think the overall general consensus is that pentacles definitely are years. And so I think that's a really fun way to work with the cards too, thinking about the suits as time. And then you could even look at the number of the card, and that could like indicate the duration. So if we're looking at Ace of Pentacles, that would be 1 year. Page of Pentacles would be 11 years. Knight of Pentacles be 12, and then 13, 14. And then in terms of like feeling though, like if we're looking at the suits, the wands as time, I think, would feel really urgent, impulsive, maybe really like quick, either quick inspiration or quick burnout. Swords time feels, kind of like not too fast, but not too slow. It's like, okay. And again, if this is weeks, it's like, you know what, maybe I'm going to spend a little bit of time like researching something. I'm not going to go too wild, but I'll spend a few days, maybe, a week or two, just trying to get clarity before I make a decision. And then cups feels a little bit more slow moving. However, because water can be both still and then rushing, I think that's interesting too. So like we could probably, depending on how you're feeling, look at the cups and then look at the water. Is the water in the card moving fast? Okay, so then you might think to yourself, if you're reading for yourself or somebody else, okay, your experience with time based on the situation is quite urgent. Or if you're looking at the cup and the water and the card is smooth and still, then maybe this person's feeling pretty, like in a flow state and pretty chill. Or maybe they feel like it's moving too slowly. And then if like you're pulling a card where the cup has spilled over, think Five of Cups, for example, they've lost time. And then with Pentacles, this is again, like you are prepared for something to take a long time, thinking about maybe going to school or like working on a big project, knowing that you're going to be dedicating, years of building something that lasts. Something I wanted to touch on before I wrap up is the work of Dr. Laurie Santos. She has some great research on a concept that she calls time affluence. And it's basically the psychological experience of having enough time, which happens to be a big predictor of happiness. And she also mentions how so many of us experience time famine, which of course is like feeling like you never have enough time. So I think it's also important to remember like time affluence isn't the same as having quote unquote free time. I think it's more of having a healthy relationship with time. And so, yeah, if you have time, I highly recommend checking out her work. I will also link a YouTube clip of one of my favorite talks where she explores this concept of time affluence and time famine. And I think it's her. I don't want to quote it, but it might be in her work. If not, I'll try to find out where else it was because I don't. This isn't coming from my brain. But I think it's her who talks about how time is more psychological than it is chronicle. And I think that's an important reminder too. Yes, there are things we can control. Yes, there are things we can't control. And, reminding ourselves like, okay, what does time affluence look like for me? So this has just been kind of free flowing random thoughts on time because I was inspired by a song and thinking about time and tarot. But I would love to hear what your relationship with time and the tarot is. Like, how do you view the suits? How do you view the imagery? Do you often think about time when you're pulling cards? How do you relate to that yourself? How do you relate it to people you're reading for? So yeah, let me know. I'm really curious about this idea and definitely want to spend some more time with it in the future. Maybe even develop a workshop on it for the symposium because I think it'd be really fun. And yeah, please let me know what you think. I'm curious about what everyone else's relationship and experience with time and the tarot is. Thank you so much for listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. For more tarot and mental health content, follow The Tarot Diagnosis on Instagram. You can also subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode and sign up to receive the Tarot Diagnosis emails where you'll have access to exclusive spreads and exciting announcements. To join an incredible community of tarot and psychology enthusiasts, join the Tarot Diagnosis membership community, The Symposium, by visiting thetarotdiagnosis.com.